I said nothing when she threw it. That's the part people find hard to believe when I tell this story. They expect me to say I grabbed her wrist, or raised my voice, or at least asked her what on earth she thought she was doing. But I didn't. I just stood there in my son's kitchen, watching my late wife's father's pocket watch spin through the air in a slow, almost graceful arc and land in the compost bin beside the refrigerator, right on top of coffee grounds and eggshells. She didn't even look back. I'm 67 years old. I spent 31 years as a land surveyor with the province of Ontario, most of it working outdoors in weather that would make a younger man quit by lunchtime. I am not a man who cries easily or loudly, but standing in that kitchen, watching my daughter-in-law walk back to her laptop at the dining room table, like nothing had happened, I felt something shift in my chest that I still don't have a clean word for. The watch had belonged to my wife's father, a man named Archie who came to Canada from Scotland in 1963 with $40 and a set of woodworking tools. He built a life in Sudbury, raised 3 daughters, and never once talked about money unless he had to. When he died, he left the watch to my wife, Nora. When Nora died 4 years ago now, pancreatic cancer 11 weeks from diagnosis to the end, she had asked me to keep it for our grandson, Theo. She said, he'll want it when he's old enough to understand what it means. He was 3 years old at the time. He's 7 now. The watch was in a small cloth pouch in my jacket pocket. I'd brought it because I had finally taken it to be serviced, first time in decades, and the watchmaker over on Elgin Street had done something remarkable with it. I wanted to show my son. I thought maybe we could talk about Nora the way we used to before his wife came into the picture, and conversations about his mother became something that made him look at the floor. I'd come for Sunday dinner. My son, Philip, he goes by Phil, always has, had called me that Thursday to invite me. His wife, Celeste, hadn't called. She never does. But Phil said, come, so I came, and I brought a bottle of Ontario Riesling and the watch. Dinner was fine in the way that dinners in that house are always fine. Polite, slightly too quiet, with Celeste doing most of the talking about her renovation plans and Phil nodding along like a man who has learned that nodding is safer than speaking. Theo sat beside me and showed me a drawing he'd done of a wolf. I told him it was the best wolf I'd ever seen. I meant it. After dinner, Phil went to put Theo to bed, and I was alone in the kitchen, helping clear plates when I made the mistake of setting the cloth pouch on the counter while I reached to stack the serving bowl. Celeste picked it up. What's this? She said, already loosening the drawstring. Nora's father's pocket watch, I said. I had it serviced. I'm keeping it for Theo. She held it up, turned it over once. The case is sterling silver with an engraved thistle on the back. Archie had it made special years before Nora was born. It's not flashy. It looks old because it is old. It's heavy, she said. Not a compliment. It's solid silver, I said. She set it on her palm, weighed it, then wrinkled her nose the way she does when Theo tracks mud in from the yard. I don't understand why you'd hold on to something like this. It's not like Theo is going to want a watch. Kids don't wear watches anymore. I told her Nora had specifically asked for it to go to him. She said, well, Nora's not here. I heard myself inhale slowly. I've thought about that moment 100 times since. What I should have said. What Archie might have said, in his quiet Scottish way that could cut you in half without raising his voice. But I was a guest in my son's house, and Phil was down the hall, and I thought, let it go for tonight. I reached out to take the watch back. She turned and dropped it in the compost bin. Just like that. As if she were clearing the counter. I'm going to be reorganizing the guest room this week, she said, already walking away, talking about whether she wanted a shiplap accent wall or just repainted drywall. You might want to call before you come next time. I've been keeping a tighter schedule. I stood at that compost bin for a long moment. Then I reached in and took the watch out, wiped the coffee grounds off the silver case with the hem of my shirt, and put it back in the cloth pouch and back into my jacket pocket. Phil came back from putting Theo to bed. He asked if I wanted coffee. I said no thank you. I thought I'd head home. He walked me to the door, and I could tell from the set of his jaw that he had heard something from down the hall, some version of events, preemptively delivered, that I would not have recognized as the same evening I had just spent. He gave me a hug at the door that lasted exactly as long as it needed to, and not 1 second more. Driving back to my house in Canada, I didn't think about Celeste. I thought about Nora. She had been the one who understood things about people that I never could. she would have seen Celeste from a mile off, understood exactly what kind of woman she was and why, and probably found some small genuine thing to like about her anyway. Because that was Nora. I used to say she was the morally advanced one in our marriage. She never disagreed. I thought about Theo showing me his wolf drawing, the way his hand looked in mine when we walked to the kitchen together after dinner, still small enough that my fingers wrapped around it twice. I did not sleep well that night. Monday morning, I went back to the watchmaker on Elgin Street. Not to return the watch, to ask a question that had been sitting in the back of my mind since I picked it up from him the week before. His name is Edmund Blaise. He's been on Elgin Street for 30-something years, one of those men who occupies a space so completely that the shop seems to have grown around him rather than the other way around. There are clocks on every surface, pocket watches behind glass, tools laid out on green, felt like surgical instruments. He's in his 70s, has a hearing aid in each ear and reading glasses on a chain, and he speaks English and French with equal unhurriedness. When I came in, he looked up and said, "You're back soon." I set the watch on the counter and told him what had happened. He didn't say anything dramatic. He picked up the watch, turned it over with the same slowness he always uses, and looked at the back, the thistle engraving, the small maker's mark just below it. Then he set it down and said, "You didn't look inside the case." I said I had assumed it was sealed. He looked at me over his reading glasses. "Did you ask me to open it?" I said no. "Then I didn't open it," he said. "But you might want to see what's in there." He took his case opener from the green felt, positioned it, and with one practiced motion released the back of the watch. It swung open on its hinge. Behind the movement, between the mechanism and the back casing, there was a folded piece of paper so thin I might have mistaken it for tissue. He lifted it out with a pair of tweezers, set it on the counter, and unfolded it with extraordinary care. It was a handwritten note. The ink was brown at the edges. The handwriting was small and precise. I am not going to reproduce it word for word here, because some things still belong to a family. But the short version is this. Archie, who came to Canada in '63 with $40, had at some point in the late 1980s purchased a small parcel of farmland in Lanark County, about 90 acres, through a private transaction that had apparently never been formally registered under his own name. The note referenced a file number and a solicitor's firm in Perth, Ontario. It referenced Nora by name, and it ended with a sentence I will remember until I die, in Archie's small, precise handwriting. "This is for the one who keeps the watch." Edmund Blaise set down his tweezers and looked at me. "You should call a lawyer," he said. Today, I went home and sat at my kitchen table for what felt like a long time, and was probably 40 minutes. Then I called my daughter, Britt. She lives in Halifax, teaches environmental law at Dalhousie, and she is, as Nora used to say, the one who inherited my stubbornness and her mother's brains, which is a dangerous combination. I told her everything: the dinner, the compost bin, Celeste's face, Edmund Blaise, the note, the land. There was a long silence. Then Britt said, "Dad, do not talk to Phil yet." I told her I wasn't going to. She said, "I mean it." Not a word. "Give me the file number and the solicitor's name and let me make some calls first." I read her the note. I heard her writing. Before she hung up, she said, "Are you okay?" I said I was fine. She said, "Dad." I said, "Not really, but I will be." It took Britt 3 days. The solicitor's firm in Perth, the founding partner, had retired, but his son was still practicing, had the file. The land transaction was real. 92 acres in Lanark County, backs onto the Mississippi River watershed, registered decades ago through a holding name, but with a private codicil that transferred beneficial ownership to Nora and, upon her death, to her husband and children jointly. The codicil had been drafted by the original solicitor. Archie had signed it, and it had been sitting in a file for the better part of 30 years waiting for someone to come looking. Britt called me the Thursday evening. She said, "Dad, I had it appraised. Rough estimate, given the river frontage and the agricultural land value in Lanark County right now." I said, "Tell me." She said the appraiser said between $800,000 and $1.1 million, depending on what a buyer wanted to do with it. I sat down. I hadn't been sitting. She said, "Are you there?" I said I was there. She said, "There's more. Because the codicil specifies jointly between you and your children, meaning you, me, and Phil, we each have a third interest. Which means Phil's third is also." "I know what that means," I said. Another silence. She said, What do you want to do? What I did not want to do was have a conversation with my son that he would go home and reconstruct for Celeste in a way that gave her time to prepare. I did not want to give her a single day's head start. Britt flew in from Halifax. She stayed with me in Canada, slept in Nora's old reading room, with the blue curtains Nora had picked out, and we ate takeout from the Lebanese place on Hazeldean, and talked until 11 o'clock at night, like we hadn't done since before she moved east. On the Saturday, she and I drove together to Phil's house. He was in the driveway washing his car when we pulled up. He looked surprised to see Britt. They're close, or they were, before Celeste arrived and quietly reorganized his life until Britt was filed under difficult. He smiled at her in a way that had something complicated in it, relief, maybe, mixed with the particular wariness of a man who has learned that his family showing up unannounced means something is about to change. Celeste came to the door when she heard the car. Her face when she saw both of us was a very specific expression. Not quite fear, the kind of alertness a person has when they realize that something they thought was under control may not be. I asked Phil if we could come inside. We sat at the same dining room table where Celeste had been working on her laptop. I let Britt talk because she is better at it than I am. She walked Phil through the watch, the note, the solicitor, the land, the appraisal. She was careful and clear the way she is in a lecture hall, and she didn't editorialize. She just laid it out. Phil got very quiet. He said, "The watched." Celeste threw in the compost. Britt didn't say anything. He looked at me. I said yes. I watched him work through it. The watch Nora had kept. The note Archie had written in his small, precise handwriting. The land by the river. The number his sister had just read to him. Celeste said, from her chair at the end of the table, "We should get our own lawyer before we do anything." Nobody responded to that. Phil said to me, "Dad, I'm sorry." He didn't say it the way you say something to end a conversation. He said it the way a person speaks when they've understood something about the past 2 years that they hadn't let themselves see before. "He's my son. I know his face," I said. "I know you are." He looked at Celeste. Something passed between them that I wasn't meant to read, but I read it anyway. He said to her quietly, "That was my mother's." She started to say something. He said, "That was my mother's watch. She put it in the garbage." He wasn't shouting. Phil rarely shouts. He has always been more like Nora in that respect than like me. But there was something in his voice that I had not heard in a long time. A steadiness. Like a man finding his footing after a long time on soft ground. Celeste said she hadn't known. He said, "I think you need to go visit your sister for a few days." That was 5 months ago. The land in Lanark County is still in the family. We're not selling, or at least not yet. Britt drove out with me in October to see it. A Tuesday, overcast, the leaves mostly down by then, that particular gray-gold light that Ontario gets in late fall when the sky can't decide what it is. We parked on a gravel road and walked the fence line and didn't say much. At the back of the property, the land drops down toward the river, not sharply but gradually, through a stand of old maples that must have been there when Archie found the place. I stood there for a while. The river was low and slow. A heron moved through the shallows on the far side. With that prehistoric patience herons have, I thought about Archie choosing this land, driving out here from Sudbury in his truck, seeing something in it that other people walked past, writing his careful note, rolling it thin enough to tuck behind a pocket watch movement, trusting that whoever kept the watch would eventually find it. He never told Nora directly, or if he did, she never told me. Maybe he thought the telling would be the finding. Phil has started calling more. He calls on Sunday nights the way he used to before he got married, and we talk about whatever, Theo's hockey, the Senators, the property, sometimes just nothing. He came out to the land with me once, on a Saturday in November. Theo came too, and ran through the dead grass with his arms out like he was an airplane. I have a photograph of that. Theo, in his orange jacket, arms wide, the maple stand behind him. It's on my kitchen table, right next to where I set the watch down every morning when I come downstairs. The way I've started to do since Edmund Blaze gave it back to me. Some mornings I just look at it for a moment before I put the kettle on. The silver case, the thistle, the weight of it. Archie brought $40 to this country. He built something that outlasted him, the way a man does when he pays attention to what actually matters. He wrapped it in a watch. He trusted the right person would find it. I'm glad it was me.